In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. We are entering into the third part of the book, which or our third discussion on this, and I'm pretty excited about it because we're going to get to some hard parts by my calculations. So let's go over here and get to where we need to go. This is not going to work out. Let me see how I can do this. Instead of having two screens, stop extending, and then, sorry, 1 second, technical difficulties. Hello, and I just don't want it to change. Okay, so window or app, choose. Thank you, man. This is awesome. Thank you. Um, Let me see. Okay, see. Oh my God. All right. Okay. You guys are seeing this now? All right. Okay. Okay. So we are past characteristics. We're going to talk about yeah, particular. This is okay. So let me just give you a little bit of a history and backdrop. When in 313, when Constantine made Christianity legal, um, there was no separation between state and church. So what you end up having to do is that if the religion of the state is Christianity, then and probably the state, by state I mean the Roman government, which is the largest employer in the area. So what you have is basically um, people just running to the church because they want to put food on the table. And so you have people that are joining Christianity just so that they can be employed with the government or keep their job or be friends with, other people. Like it becomes a very popular religion. And this was also simultaneously the time when Christianity, um, monasticism started to grow because people didn't like being Christians in the world. Before you were Christian in the world, you proved your Christianity by dying for Christ as a martyr. When you couldn't die as a martyr, then you went to the desert and you became a monastic. So why I'm setting this up here is because we're going to read about some very, what might seem like discouraging situations that St. John is going to talk about. And it's unfortunate. It was a reality back then, and unfortunately, it can be a reality today. So part of it is take heart. Take heart because if it was plaguing the church back then, it continues to plague the church today, then that means the church is being able to overcome it. It's not, just the way of the church. Because sometimes people see scandals in the church, they're like, wow, this is crazy, this is ridiculous. But there are those that trust in God, and that's what St. John, with his faith, trusts in God, and so these things don't bother him or don't affect him in a way. Like he's definitely a staunch critic of what's going on, and we're going to talk about that now. Um, a lot of this is we're going to skip, but just to kind of set the stage, we'll start from the very beginning. It talks about promotions. Would you like me to show you one more aspect of this contest, which is full of innumerable dangers, the idea of kind of being ordained? Come and take a peep at the public festivals, at which it is the custom for most appointments to ecclesiastical office to be made. So there's like some sort of carnival, festival, games, whatever, where all the city's coming to have fun and entertainment, and the church is making appointments. You will see the priest assailed with as many accusations as there are persons under his rule. For all who are qualified to bestow the honor are then split into many factions, and the synod of presbyters can be seen agreeing neither among themselves nor with one another, nor with the one who has received the episcopal office. So you see, like priests are arguing with each other and with the bishop, and each stands alone, and one chooses this candidate and another that. And the reason is that they do not all concentrate on the one thing they should, spiritual worth. So, what we're going to do is take the positive out of this. What is the positive? Is that when selecting a candidate, you should look at his spirituality, his spiritual worth. It should be one of the characteristics. Now, albeit spirituality can be faked, unfortunately, but he wants to accentuate the importance of it. There are other considerations which influence appointment to the office. For example, one might say, let this man be chosen because he belongs to a distinguished family. So, someone is being chosen because maybe their family has I mean, this is like a play straight from I don't know, the Catholic Church with like the Medicis and stuff. Or another says, because he possesses a large fortune and would not need supporting out of the church's revenues. It happens. Rich guy, oh, this guy's got money. We don't need to pay his salary. He'll be a good priest. All we need him to do is just say, Shlil and Irini policy, and that's it, we'll be done. Um, and then, oh, because he's a convert from the other side. There are canons against ordaining converts, but probably weren't in place at this time in quickly ordaining converts. And there's a funny story of that. I don't even know who or where or what. There was a Muslim who converted to Christianity. They wanted to make him a bishop or wanted to make him a priest, and the bishop said, wait on this guy, wait. And they said, no, he's good, he's good. He's like, okay, all right, have him come and we'll ordain him tomorrow. So the guy comes and he calls him. So the bishop puts a lizard in the matchbox and tells the guy, go light the censer. So he's taking it out. The lizard jumps out and he exclaims something in that's Islamic. Like some sort of like some sort of explanation that and the bishop said, see, I told you, he's not ready yet. Uh, he's still got that in him. Um, so, yeah, but this was something, oh, he's a convert from the other side. One man is anxious to promote above the rest a friend, another a relative, another someone who flatters him. No one will look for the best qualified man or apply any spiritual test. It was because there was this, because a priest essentially is a government employee, right? A priest essentially is a government. It's the same as what you find in like Greece and in Russia. This is, and I'm sure even among the Roman Catholic Church to some extent in Rome, like or in the Vatican. So this is why people are gunning for this position. They're not thinking about, oh, why would somebody want to take a million confessions and pray liturgies and do all these services and visitation? No, they're not thinking about the difficulty. They're thinking, oh, this is a cushy job for very little. I myself, so far from thinking these are worthy grounds for approving priests, should not dare to select a man quickly, even if he showed great piety. So even if he's like, this guy's great, though to me it is no small qualification for that office, unless he combined with piety considerable intelligence as well. So we have spiritual worth and piety with that, and intelligence as well. For I know many who have kept themselves under discipline all their life, so kind of demonstrating piety, demonstrating spirituality, exhausted their bodies with fasting, and who, as long as they were allowed to live alone, attend to their own needs, were acceptable to God, and every day made great progress in this philosophy. Yet when they returned to normal society, and had to correct the follies of the common person, people, they either did not begin to cope with so great a responsibility, or else, when compelled to remain at their post, abandoned their former higher standards, brought a heavy penalty on themselves, and were not of the least use to others. So let's say a bishop who was a monk at first comes and starts to be a bishop over a diocese, so he's away from his monastery. That bishop ought to still remain monastic in his lifestyle. This idea of the fasting and the discipline and whatnot. And when he returns to normal society, be able to cope with the madness of the day-to-day people, the ordinary human, as well as keep his high standards of prayer. And the same is true for priests as well. Um, he goes on and he kind of talks about, maybe ordaining somebody we wouldn't ordain somebody, or sorry, we wouldn't promote somebody who's old simply because they're the next in line. You want somebody at a business to have competency as well. And this isn't just a kind of a position to, all right, you're next, so we'll ordain you. He says, and at the end of this paragraph, he says, but I'm anxious to show that if neither piety by itself nor old age alone are sufficient to prove a man worthy of the priesthood, the reasons I have mentioned are hardly likely to do so. The reasons I have mentioned are hardly likely to. So, let me see if I could say that again. But I am anxious to show that if neither piety nor itself, by itself, nor old age alone are sufficient to prove a man worthy of the priesthood, the reasons I have mentioned are hardly likely to do so. So, I guess he's trying to say there's still a long ways off. Um, Other people go on to give reasons which are stranger still. So, reasons for enlisting priests into the ranks. He says some are enlisted in the ranks to prevent their siding with the enemy. So, if you don't ordain me, I'm gonna, I don't know, become a person of another religion, right? And others because of their bad character. Look, this guy needs to be a priest because he's such a bad influence on other people. We just need to put him in a situation where he's around good stuff and good people. I mean, we think about this sometimes in the service. Oh, this servant is really far from, this person is far from me. Let's make him a servant. Give him responsibilities. Maybe that'll turn him to Christ. Um, Others because of their bad character, or to stop them causing a lot of trouble if they are overlooked. Could any worse violation of the right take place than that corrupt men, replete with vices, should be courted for the very things for which they ought to be punished? So we are interested in you because you are a bad seed. We are interested in you because you have many problems that we want to help you fix. And they're promoted to priestly dignity for the very thing for which they ought to be forbidden to cross the threshold of the church. Now, I know this is it's funny to kind of imagine this sort of situation going on in Constantinople, but believe me, I've seen it also in the Coptic Orthodox Church in the 21st century, where parents will come and they'll say, "Hey, my kid really needs something to do in church. Give him some sort of service." All right, sweeping the floors, what kind of, this person's not going to talk to anybody, right? We're not contemplating that kind of service, are we? Because if they're far from church, why would I want to bring them in to bring other people far from the church? Or what will they bring to the service? Well, there's other service other than teaching, of course. Tell me, do we need to look any further for the cause of God's anger when we expose the most sacred and awe-inspiring things to defilement by wicked and worthless men? He says, when some men are entrusted with things unsuited to them and others with things quite beyond their powers, they make the church as unstable as Euripus. So I had to look up what Euripus is. Euripus is a narrow water channel with rapidly changing tidal currents. So it's in itself unstable to navigate um, by boat. And he says, I once used to deride secular rulers because they distributed honors not on the grounds of inherent merit, but on wealth or seniority or worldly rank. Nepotism, simony, whatever you want to call it. They give like, all right, you could be mayor, you can be governor, you could whatever. But he says, but when I heard that this stupidity had swaggered into our own affairs too, he's talking about in the church, I no longer reckoned this action so strange. Um, for why should we be surprised that worldly people who love the praise of the mob and do everything for money should make this mistake when those who claim to have renounced all these desires are no better? And at the very end of this, I think he says something very important for us to understand the magnitude of the priesthood. They simply take commonplace men and put them in charge of what? Of those things for which the only begotten Son of God did not disdain to empty himself of his own glory, and to be made man, and to receive the form of a servant, and to be spitted upon, and buffeted, and to die the most shameful death. He says, this is what we're in charging to people who have chosen the priesthood. And they do not stop at this, but go on to other actions stranger still. They not merely um, choose the unworthy, they reject those who are suitable, as though it were necessary to undermine the safety of the church in both ways. He's being a little sarcastic, but he's being very strong in his argument. Or as though the first reason were not enough to kindle the wrath of God, they have added another reason no less serious. For I think it is as bad to keep out the capable as to bring in the useless. And this is done to prevent the flock of Christ from finding comfort or a breathing space anywhere. Does not this deserve a hail of thunderbolts? Does it not deserve some, this is crazy, special hell? And not just the one we are threatened with? Yet all these evils are suffered and borne patiently by the one who does not desire the death of a sinner. So he's saying, even though there's all this craziness in the church, God himself, who does not wish the death of the sinner, bears this patiently. But rather that he should be converted and live, the sinner should be converted and live. How can we marvel enough at this love for man or wonder at his mercy? It is love for man and mercy that God lets this ineptness kind of continue. This next line is very important. Christians damage Christ's cause more than his enemies and foes. And this is something that too often recurs. And I always feel that we are stuck in this loop where it is Christians who damage Christ's cause, not those from the outside. When Christianity, or I should say, before Christianity was legalized, all of the church's problems were from the outside, being killed, being martyred. Once it was legalized, the problems started from within. Bishops fighting with bishops, priests fighting with bishops, and a lot of heresies developed inside the church. But the good Lord still shows his kindness and calls us to repentance. Glory be to thee, O Lord, glory be to thee. What an abyss of love is in thee. How great are the riches of thy forbearance. Men who through thy name have come to be worthy and respected instead of mean and worthless. Use that honor against thee who gavest it, and dare what is forbidden, and insult what is holy, rejecting and excluding the earnest, in order that evil men may have perfect freedom and full security to subvert whatever they desire. But he's also saying this in a way that even though this is happening, God is still in charge of the church. That no matter what these men do, they cannot destroy the church, subvert it, and so this is very important for us to understand. Continuing, if you want to know the reasons for this scandal, you will find they are like those I mentioned before. They have one root and, so to speak, one mother, malice. Malice. Yet they are not all of one kind, but different. One man says, reject him because he is young. Another says, reject him because he has not learned how to flatter. Another, because he has offended so and so. Or again, someone says, reject him in case so and so should be hurt to see his own nominee rejected and this man appointed. Another says, reject him because he is good and just. Another, because sinners fear him. And another gives some other such reason. They have ready to hand all the pretexts they require. Even the number of existing clergy is sufficient argument. What does that mean? We've got enough priests. We've got enough priests. When they have no better. Or they argue that it is advisable not to promote a man to this honor suddenly, but gently and by degrees. And they can find as many other reasons as they want. But I should like to ask you now what a bishop ought to do when he has to contend with so many winds. How can he stand firm against such great breakers? How can he repel all these attacks? He's kind of saying, you want me to be a bishop. How can a bishop endure all of these things? If he settles the question by honest assessment, all men become enemies and foes to him and to those whom he has chosen. Everything they do is meant to create hostility to him. They stir up feuds daily and heap endless ridicule on those he has chosen until they either depose them or get their own men in. It is like a captain, he's describing the bishop of the church, a captain having pirates sailing with him on board ship and continually plotting hour by hour against him and the sailors and the crew. If, on the other hand, he prefers popularity with them to his own safety and so chooses unsuitable men, he will incur God's enmity in place of theirs. And what could be worse than that? And his relations with them will be more difficult than before. So even if he gives in to them, he says his relationship will be more difficult than before since they all conspire together and become so much the stronger. So they're on the outside and they appoint his man, and now his man is with them. When fierce winds meet from contrary quarters, the sea, which before was quiet, suddenly rages and towers and destroys those who sail in it. So the calm sea of the church, when evil men are accepted, is filled with surf and wreckage. Consider this, then. What qualities a man needs if he is to withstand such a tempest and deal successfully with these obstacles to the common good? He must be dignified, yet modest, impressive, yet kindly, masterful, yet approachable, impartial, yet courteous, humble, but not servile, vehement, but yet gentle, in order that he may be able calmly to resist all these dangers and to promote a suitable man with full authority, even though everyone opposes him, and reject an unsuitable man with equal authority, even though everyone favors him. Right? This is crazy. One thing alone he must consider. What will edify the church? And to edify, I like that word, to build up, to add and to build upon the foundation, which is Jesus Christ. He must do nothing out of hostility or out of favor. Well then, do you think it was unreasonable to excuse myself from serving in this capacity? So basically kind of adds to his defense about why he just did not want to get involved. And then he starts talking about certain duties. The duties now, I'm going to kind of go quickly through these. So he talks about the duties of, for example, the widow. Um, Widows obviously are women who have um, lost their husbands. And you would think, oh, all it is, he says, you think it's simple, just kind of financial. Just got to give them some money, support them. He says, no, it's actually very difficult. First, you have to scrutinize whoever you take into that company of widows. Can't just be anyone. Entering their names carelessly and casually has led to untold problems or troubles. They wreck homes. They have wrecked homes and broken marriages, and often been detected stealing and procuring and committing other disgraceful offenses like these. To support women like that from church funds brings down vengeance from God and utter condemnation from men, and discourages those who want to do good. For who would ever choose to spend the money which he is commanded to give to Christ on those who bring Christ's name into dishonor? So there's a little bit here about distribution of the funds, how funds should be given out. Not everyone who needs should be given. And sometimes giving causes a problem. And so he says this is pretty difficult and causes some problems. And he talks about and he talks a little bit about the distribution of funds. He says here, after the scrutiny, there follows another big anxiety to see that the means for their support should pour in abundantly. So not only do let's say I have qualified widows, I have to worry about the money continuing to come in. That's what he's saying. Like water from a spring and never fail. Involuntary poverty is an insatiable evil, querulous and unthankful. Great wisdom and plenty of energy are required to take away all occasion for complaint and stop their tongues wagging. So he's basically saying we if they're not taken care of, they're gonna kind of turn around and complain and cause issues, which is understandable. St. John Chrysostom is very compassionate to those who are financially um, not unstable. Very compassionate to their overreaction, to their complaining, to their everything. He says when people see anyone, so he says great wisdom and plenty of energy to put up with the constant issues and problems that arise from the women of this situation. He says when people see anyone superior to avarice, like not greedy, they at once appoint him as suitable for this administration. But I do not think that honesty by itself is enough. It's not about someone who's not stealing and giving away. He says you must look for it, first of all, since without it, a man will be a spoiler rather than a guardian and a wolf instead of a shepherd. So, of course, yeah, you have to look for honesty. But you also must look for the possession of another quality as well, and that is forbearance, patience, the source of all human blessings, which guides the soul to anchorage and escorts it into a fair haven. So, honesty is another qualification, and forbearance or great patience to be able to endure with those who are um, complaining. And he describes it a little bit more here. He says, widows as a class, owing partly to their poverty, partly to their age, partly to their sex, use an unbridled freedom of speech to call it no worse. They scold out of season and find unnecessary fault and lament when they ought to be thankful for and criticize when they ought to welcome. The man in charge of them must bear it all politely and not be provoked by their inopportune fussing or their unreasonable complaints. This is actually standard for priests as well as bishops in so many different areas of the service. You got to suck it up, you got to take it, you got to listen. You have to be patient with them, understanding that there's something else bothering them. He says, why? For persons of this kind deserve to be pitied, not insulted for their misfortunes. And it would be a mark of utter cruelty to take advantage of their misfortunes and add to the pain of poverty, the pain of insult. This is don't react. Don't react. Um, and it's really beautiful. I mean, he goes on. I wasn't expecting to read this so much. Okay, we'll finish this section and then we'll move on to another one. Yeah, but he's talking about it in terms of the priest himself is the one who's administering these funds in a way where he's not going to be thanked for it. And he's got to be careful about the ones that he brings in.
These persons, that seems like something, the only person I would notice is like, I mean, for a priest, the wife, the spiritual father, perhaps.
Yeah, how do
Especially
you?
when it comes to financial matters, like the average congregant wouldn't know that that person
Sure.
has the forbearance of it.
So I think that this part of it is probably more useful to help one who's already engaged in the service to understand how they're to approach it. There's definitely sometimes we've got this approach, and I've seen it more often than not where, oh, beggars can't be choosers. So St. Paul is saying, St. John is saying, no, no, don't take that approach. And he's talked about it here, and he talks about it in a different place, maybe in the next section, but he says, it's bad enough that you make them beg. And then because they beg, you accuse them of being bold or brazen. And then afterward, yeah, he kind of like, he says, it's our fault to begin with, right? That brings them to this level. In another passage, some person was complaining to him about how a man was begging outside, showing like his amputated leg and that he has a child. And St. John, I believe it was in his epistle to the Hebrews, his commentary in the epistle to the Hebrews, where he says, "You are the one that's at fault because if you had given to him when he asked, he wouldn't have embarrassed himself by showing you his wounds and showing you that he is in need because he has a child. So you forced him to this, and then you are insulting and complaining about him because you forced him to this. So you're wrong twice." And you should have just given to him in the first place instead of forcing him to reduce himself and embarrass himself in society. Anyways, um, so that is why a very wise man, observing the avarice and indifference of human nature, realized the terrible characteristic of poverty, that it debases. So he's talking about poverty is the characteristic of it is that it debases the most generous soul and often teaches it to lose all shame on such matters. So he's saying poverty itself is what forces a beautiful soul, a generous soul, to lose all shame in so many matters. And so, to prevent anyone being angry when solicited by them and becoming their enemy when he ought to be their helper, because provoked by continual entreaty, he instructs us to be gentle and accessible to the needy, saying, "Incline your ear to a poor man without grieving and answer him with peaceable words and meekness." This is from Ecclesiasticus, where he's, and I think Ecclesiasticus is actually Sirach, if I'm remembering that correctly. Um, or the Wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom of Solomon, yeah, okay. And ignoring those who provoke a man in distress, for what can you say to such sinners? He speaks to anyone who bears another's infirmity, urging him to help him up by kind looks and gentle words before making a gift. So here it is. It's not just about, here, take this. It's about it's about being kind to them and thoughtful and sort of empathetic and sympathetic, if you want to say, to what they're going through. Okay, I understand. If anyone should not actually take what is theirs, but should load them with reproaches and insult them and be exacerbated by them, he not only fails to relieve the desperation of poverty by his gift, but aggravates its misery by his abuse. For even if they are compelled by sheer hunger to be all too brazen, they are still hurt by this necessity. So when they are forced, here it is. So when they are forced to beg by fear of starvation and to be brazen by their begging, and are insulted because of their brazenness, the force of despondency which attacks them comes subtly and casts a deep gloom over them. Whoever's in charge of them should be so long suffering that, far from increasing their despondency by his own irritation, he actually soothes most of it away by his sympathy. For just as a rich man insulted forgets the benefit of his wealth through the pain of the insult, so one of these who hears a kind word or kindly word and receives a gift offered with sympathy, so it's not just a gift, but a gift offered with sympathy, brightens up and is happy. The gift is doubled by the very manner of giving. I say this not of myself, but on the authority of the writer whose advice I have quoted already. My son, he says, to thy good deeds add no blemish and no grief of words in any of thy giving. Shall not the dew assuage the scorching heat? So is a word better than a gift. Lo, a word is better than a gift, and both are with a gracious man. The guardian of these people must be not only just and forbearing, but a good steward. For if this quality is missing, the money of the poor is again exposed to equal risk of loss. Aha, so what are we going to do here? What are we going to say here? He's now talking about the use of the money in the church. Before now, it has happened that someone entrusted with this ministry and having collected a lot of money has not wasted it on himself, but has not spent it on the needy either, except for a few. So, hoarding money in the church, according to St. John, is a sin. He says he has hidden and hoarded most of it until bad times have come and betrayed it into the hands of enemies. Much foresight, therefore, is needed to prevent the resources of the church either piling up or running short. It is better to distribute all that is subscribed among the needy quickly and to lay up treasure for the church in the goodwill of the congregation. Oh, there's a lot going on here. Serapion would always say, the job of the church is to be poor. He says the church should always be poor, and the people should be rich. You should invest in the people, not in. And one of the priests, he said, if Serapion ever found out how much money you guys have in the bank, you're going to be in big trouble. And I've taken that to heart. We, of course, have funds laid aside for the building projects, but the other funds that we have should be given as we can to the poor. There's always there's rules set up, right? So we're not just kind of running around looking for whoever we can give it to, but in the moment that someone asks, we should always give. In the writing of Saint Justin, martyr, in describing his first apology, in describing this is around the middle of the second century, he says, there is a collection made on the day of the Lord, and it is deposited with the president to take care of the poor and the needy as they need fit, as he sees them need fit. Right? That's kind of language there. Money is given to the priest to give to the poor. And Saint John is saying here, look, the congregation is giving you money for the poor. Give to the poor so you have goodwill with the congregation. Give to the poor so the congregation knows that what they're giving their money to, it's actually going there instead of someplace else. This is a bit of transparency is needed, as well as wisdom and kind of earmarking. This is for this. In the church, if someone were to give, $1 million, let's say, or some incredible amount of money to the poor, has to go to the poor. It can't be to pay the mortgage or keep the lights on or the salaries or anything. even if even if it means missing a mortgage payment. You see, like this is how important it is. I grew up in a church where there were two bags that were distributed, one for the church, one for the poor. And what was taken from the church, many times 60%, 70% were put in the poor. And if there was nothing in the bag for the church, he would never take from the poor. Right? So this is kind of the mindset of the church from the very beginning. And that's why, the church should always be, and I've been goaded by this a Greek Orthodox church in Boston that paid off all the medical debts of the community. They spent $3 million on that. $3 million to pay off all the medical, not of the people, the Christians or the Greek Orthodox, just the neighbors in the community. Like God willing, one of these days before I die, we'll do it. We'll try and do an endeavor like that. I don't know how you figure out who's got medical debt or what. We'll figure that out when we get there. But the idea is that we have to kind of think about how we can use the resources we have uh, to serve those that are right next to us. Um, what a lot of expense and care and thought on the part of those in charge is required for hospitality to strangers and the care of the sick. This is never less and often more than the expenditures I've already mentioned. So he's talking about not just the widows, he's talking about now the strangers and the sick. The man in charge must be discreet and a shrewd treasurer, so as to encourage the wealthy to emulate one another and to give cheerfully of their substance, His object is to provide for the relief of the sick without scourging the souls of the contributors, right? And here he must show outstanding forbearance and concern. Sick men are hard to please and given to languor. Unless every attention and care is lavished on them, the smallest neglect is enough to cause the patient great distress. I've seen this too. I've seen this too. And sometimes when we're trying to be loving and caring, right? And you know, like like we have to kind of go and do as much as possible to make sure people are comfortable, as opposed to saying, you should be happy that, or you should be thankful that we even, that's not how we should approach this. Now he goes into a long section on the virgins, which I don't think we're going to talk much about. The virgins are basically women who, it's kind of like convent style under the bishop. Um, and the care that goes into them obviously takes um, a lot of time and effort and energy. And then afterwards, he talks about arbitration, visiting, and excommunication. Um, and here he talks about the judicial function involved in the church. So it's kind of like that in the Coptic Orthodox Church still today, especially in Egypt, where the priest and the bishop oftentimes is on a non-binding basis, kind of adjudicating issues that happen between people. So, two Christian neighbors, a Christian boss and his Christian employee, sometimes a Muslim landlord and a Christian tenant, sometimes a Muslim boss and a Christian. The priest is oftentimes involved in the day-to-day of the people. So it is a burden and it takes a lot of time and there's a lot of difficulties that go into it. Um, and he says, but it's not just time, it's not just expenditure of time and difficulty are these are not the only two things, but there is no little danger. That means there's a lot of danger. Before now, some of the weaker brethren have got involved in disputes and finding no favoritism have made shipwreck concerning the faith. For many of those who have suffered wrong, listen to this, hate those who cannot help them just as much as they hate those who did the wrong. Which is oftentimes, I mean, it's not a Christian attitude, but sometimes people in their weakness, they say, you can't help me? I hate you. You're not going to help me? I hate you. They will not take into account the complicated nature of the business or the difficulty appointing a suitable time or the limitation of the ecclesiastical authority or anything else of the kind. They are merciless critics who recognize only one thing in the judge's favor, deliverance from the troubles which oppress them. If he cannot offer them this, however many good reasons he gives, he will never avoid their condemnation. And since I have already mentioned favoritism, let me disclose to you another occasion for blame. If the bishop does not pay a more extensive round of daily visits than ordinary loungers, indescribable offense will be taken. So he's basically saying, unless the bishop, it has nothing to do and just goes around visiting people like loungers do, like, I'm going to go visit this, I'm going to go visit. Unless he does this, they're going to be indescribable offense. Not only the sick, but the healthy want to be visited by the bishop. Not so much because their piety prompts them, as because most of them lay claim to honor and distinction. And if he happens to visit one of the richer and more influential men more frequently, prompted by some special need and for the common good of the church, he wins at once the reputation of a flatterer and a toady. I don't know what those means, but you can understand like, oh, he's just visiting the rich people, or oh, he's just wanting to get his pockets lined, whatever. Um, Visitations, of course, are essential and key. Um, but he gets funny. He's like, even if you're going to have to make a defense for even, he says, the merest glance. If you look at somebody in the wrong way, or somebody looks and you don't look at somebody in the right way, or you're giving so much, you're in a group and you talk to this person a little bit longer than you talk to this person, he says people are going to put you under a minute examination. He smiled affably at so and so, says one, and spoke to him with a bright face and a hearty voice, but he was less pleasant with me, and indeed quite casual. When a crowd is seated together, if he does not turn his eyes in every direction while conversing, the rest say his action is an insult. You can see how this becomes very, very difficult. For since there is no accuser more bitter than our own conscience, we have no difficulty in bearing the milder accusations of others when we have first been convicted by that most severe accuser, ourselves. But when someone whose conscience acquits him of evil is accused without a cause, he is quickly roused to anger and easily falls into desperation unless he has trained himself already to bear the mischief of the mob. You know that saying about there's a basically this fable by of a guy named Goha. Goha is like this wise fool in the Egyptian tradition. Actually, there's a Goha in the Persian tradition. I actually have a book about it. He's not called Goha though. He's called something else. Where's that book now? It was a really good book. It's like a comic book from like the 60s of these stories in English. There's a Goha, but there's a story of Goha with his son and they have a donkey. And they're walking with the donkey, and everybody looks at him, and they're like, he goes into one village and says, "Look at this guy. He's got a donkey. He doesn't use it. What an idiot." So Goha thinks, okay, let me put my son on the donkey. So he puts his son on the donkey. They look at him and they say, "Oh, look at that boy, how cruel he is, making his father walk." And he's resting on there. So, okay, so Goha takes the son off, puts himself on. The next group of people, look at that father, how inconsiderate he is, making his son walk and while he sits on the donkey. So Goha's like, okay, let me just put my son and myself on the donkey. The next group of people, look at that cruel owner of the donkey putting all that weight on his back. And then I think the end of the story goes that at the end of the day, Goha carries the donkey. And they're like, look at that idiot. The moral of the story is you can't please everyone. Um, and that's definitely true. The mischief of the mob. And how can one describe the grief bishops feel when anyone has to be excommunicated from the body of the church? This is such a difficult, difficult situation. What punishment then must a man expect when he not only has to render account of his own offenses, but also stands in the utmost peril for the sins of others? If we shudder when our own offenses are examined, for fear that we shall not be able to escape the threatened fire, what must that man expect to suffer who will have to answer for so many? To prove that this is true, hear what St. Paul says, or rather, not Paul, but Christ who speaks in him. Obey them that have the rule over you and submit to them, for they watch in behalf of your souls as they that shall give account. Hebrews 13:17. Is the fear of this threat trivial? We dare not say it is. And that is really kind of the heart of it. And then he goes into the penalty of failure. I have just a few minutes, but I think he basically says, okay, let's say you didn't want to be a priest and somebody pushed you to be a priest and you accepted to be a priest. You can't say in the end, oh, look, I didn't want to do this. You know, they forced me to do this. I shouldn't be to blame. And he gives examples of individuals who were not able to say that. First with Saul. Saul wasn't looking to become king. He was made king by Samuel, but he had to. But when he failed, it was because of his own feebleness. Um, um, he could say, oh, I should never have committed this sin if I wasn't chosen. But he says right here, but all these excuses are feeble, and not only feeble, but dangerous, and they rouse God's anger even more. For a man who has received an honor beyond his deserving should not use its greatness as a cloak for his own faults. He ought rather to use God's abundant favor towards him as a stronger incentive to improvement. But because he has been so highly honored, he thinks he's allowed to make mistakes and is determined to prove that the cause of his own sins is the kindness of God. This was what we talked about in Romans. Let us sin so that God's goodness and faithfulness and grace can be seen. He says that doesn't work. This is always the argument of irreverent men who manage their lives carelessly. We must not be like that. We must not fall into the same confusion as they do. Rather, we should be at all times determined to play our part to the best of our ability and to be reverent in word and thought. So it's not like you have to be a super success as a priest, but you have to be guaranteed, or you have to be committed towards improvement, be honest, be faithful in the service that's been given to you. He talks about Eli. He talks about Moses himself. He continued to decline the honor. He says, no, no, I don't want it. I don't want it, until he roused the anger of God. In the Bible, the first person that God was angry with was Moses. Not Adam, not Eve, not Cain, not whatever. The first time it says God was angry was with Moses at this point in time. And then at the end, Moses strikes the rock. He couldn't say, oh, look, I never wanted this to begin with. He was punished. And so he did not have an excuse. There's a third example, Judas, of course. Yeah. Judas is the prime example. We must not misuse the honors bestowed on us by God to offend God, but to please Him the more. Um, and here's a nice passage, and we will kind of, I think we'll end with this. There's some other nice things, but I don't want to go too long. But a man who claims to be exempt from the punishment he deserves because he has been more highly honored, is doing much what one of the unbelieving Jews would have done if he had heard Christ say, if I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin. Right? If I hadn't come and spoken, you wouldn't have had sin. And if I had not done among them the works which none other did, they had not had sin. This is John 15:22 and 24. And then had accused his Savior and benefactor and said, why then did you come and speak? Why did you do miracles? So that you might punish us more severely? Right? Do you see like the kind of reverse logic? Like Jesus Christ says, if I hadn't said anything, you would have no sin. But now that I've said it, you have sin. Or if I didn't do these miracles, you wouldn't have had sin in you, or I couldn't have been accused of sin. But now that I've done the miracles and said, I can accuse you of sin. And they would have said, well, why did you come in the first place? What do you want to just punish us? Such words would be signs of madness and utter insanity. This is beautiful. He says, the physician did not come to condemn you, but to heal you and to rid you completely of your disease. But you willfully refuse the touch of those hands. Receive then heavier punishment. You would have been rid of your former diseases if you had yielded to the treatment. Sometimes the priesthood is the treatment for the priest. Maybe God is calling you to serve others, but maybe also God is calling you for your own salvation in the priesthood. But now that you have seen him coming and avoided him, you cannot any longer wash off these stains. And since you cannot, you will be punished both for them and for having frustrated his care as much as you could. Um, and he does say one more nice thing. He says, for those who are strong like you, it is to hang their hopes of salvation on nothing after God's grace, except the avoidance of all that is unworthy of that gift and of God the giver. So he's basically saying, because Basil's losing it at this point in time. He says, for now I cannot control myself. So frightened and nervous have you made me by what you have said. He says, no, no. Look, you're strong and you just hang on to the hope of salvation, and their hopes of salvation are nothing after God's grace. So like all you have to do is focus on God's grace. Um, avoid idleness, avoid wickedness, um, test your own soul, he says, and when you've thoroughly investigated every part of it, then and only then should you give way to their constraint, to becoming a priest. Um, Talks about building. he talks a little bit. He's like, look, think about this. He's like, look, if you were buying a slave, he says it is not peculiar that when people want to buy a slave, they show him to doctors and demand guarantors for the purchase and make inquiries of neighbors, and after that, still lack confidence and demand a long trial period. Yet when they are going to admit a man to this great ministry, they make a careless and random choice without further examination. This is kind of going back to the idea of just kind of picking them based on the money they own, or but there needs to be careful inquiry and a minute examination. Um, he says something again also, which is good. This is towards the end. He says after he makes, he's making a lot of arguments against the what has to happen in the life of the priest or life of the person that's going towards the priest. He says, I will not add the argument that no one can compel another against his will. No one can force you to do this. Don't, be bullied into this. You have to be, a priest has to know and feel the calling. Um, and, and, and I mean, I'll just go and say it, like I was going to pass over this part, but if we take the priesthood and we don't understand it, our penalty is fire unquenchable, the worm that does not die, and gnashing of teeth, outer darkness, cutting asunder, and being numbered with the hypocrites. But those who denounce us refuse to see any of this, otherwise they would have stopped blaming a man who does not want to perish all for nothing. So he's basically saying, this is what I feel is the penalty for my failure as a priest, and this is why I have refused, and I shouldn't be blamed for wanting to refuse it. This was a tougher chapter and a tougher section, but important for us to kind of ramp up um, the idea of what is necessary for a priest, and for a priest to kind of understand that a lot is demanded from the ministry. Um, but I want to promise you that the next sections are more down to the point of what a priest needs to do and how he needs to execute his functions. And I look forward to talking about this next week, God willing. All right. Any causes of concern, alarm, questioning, Vespa?
Is the wrath that same Chrysostom? Because I mean, I was thinking about it, Saint Isaac the Syrian, he said that God's wrath, it's not like some retribution against the humanity, but rather it's like this intense love that he has. Is Saint John Chrysostom using that same language?
No, so I don't think so. Both are talking about punishment and wrath of God, maybe in a different way. No, what Saint John Chrysostom is saying is um, there is the priesthood when it is not executed in the right way is worthy of punishment. Not in that kind of punishment, because that kind of punishment, I think it's it's important to understand Saint Isaac the Syrian's idea of punishment and hell and whatever. That's a whole nother conversation, but it's not the same as this. And we're not saying that one is right and one is wrong. I'm not going to put the two saints against each other. Both of them have um, there's some validity to what they're saying, but what Saint John Chrysostom is saying is, this is very serious as a priest, as a shepherd. And so it shouldn't be chosen, they shouldn't be chosen carelessly or based on non-spiritual values. And the priest who's chosen has to understand that they have nothing that they can say, like, I wasn't forced, or, I didn't know how to do this. Like, they have to kind of commit to it, commit to being better, and commit to executing their craft as good as possible. Just like if you wanted somebody to do surgery on you, brain surgery, you wouldn't go to ask a plumber to do it or pay a plumber to do it, right? You would want someone who's got medical experience. And in the same vein, if you need plumbing work, you wouldn't go to a neurologist who doesn't know anything about that stuff. And so the priest has to be geared towards the work and understand what's on the line, not just, doing a good job or not, but your salvation and being punished for the salvation of others or for causing them not to be saved. So he kind of goes through this whole, yeah, we're messing up. There's a lot of bad choices in the church. God is still in charge, and thank God for that. But those people that are being placed there, if they're reading this and they're listening and paying attention, you're gonna be punished for, just taking this as a job in the government, right? And St. John really had to do this because he was definitely um, the most prepared for the priesthood and to become a bishop. Like he had studied, under Libanius, which was a premier teacher of rhetoric and oration. And so he got like a really high secular education. He had been a monastic for years. He was in Constantinople. He was an excellent orator, excellent speaker, knew the Bible inside out. I mean, like, if anyone was to be a priest, it would have been him. But he didn't want to go and say, yeah, of course I deserve it. He says, no, even with all of that, I don't deserve it. I don't want it. Look at all of this. I mean, yeah, later on he's ordained, but it was so good that he wrote this so that we could say, all right, there's something, there's something to his piety and his humility and his um, desire not to run after this office. It was really, he had to make a stand and a statement. Um, all right. Let's end it here. For those online, go in peace. The peace of